Hi, everyone. This is Kelly Condon. I'm part of the Texas Oncology Foundation, and I just wanted to get us started today. First, I just want to welcome you. We are so pleased that all of you are choosing to be with us tonight, and that you are just taking time out of your evening to hear from Christy Collins. And we are so thankful that Christy's here with us, and she's going to be leading us in a discussion about Caregiving 101. The Texas Oncology Foundation, our main mission is to give back to survivors in our Texas oncology communities all over Texas. And our hope is that the funds and support that we raise in these communities stay in these communities. One of our ways that we give back is through our survivorship programmings. And this is, if any of you have attended our Survive and Thrive symposiums, those are day-long informational and connecting events that we hope just unifies our communities around the state. The Survive and Thrive webinar is a new series that we have started towards the end of 2017 and have continued in 2018. It is a monthly webinar where we discuss different topics across all survivorship aspects and areas of life. And so we are thrilled, like I said, to have Christy Collins here with us tonight. I cannot wait to hear this presentation about Caregiving 101. One thing that I do want to introduce you to is that we have polls that are going to help you be interactive throughout the presentation. And so when this happens, you will see your screen currently be interrupted by a poll. And so we're going to do a few just to get some practice and also just to kind of learn who is in our audience. So first, we would love to know who is in our audience. Do we have survivors, caregivers, or healthcare providers? So I'm going to launch it, and you can fill it in on your screen and just select your demographic and let us know who is listening. Awesome. It looks like we are actually pretty even across the board. Healthcare providers are our majority, but we have a lot of caregivers and survivors on the call as well, so that's really exciting. One more question is we would just like to know, what are you most interested in learning about? Healthcare providers, are you interested in finding out more about how you can support not only the patient, but also the caregiver? For our caregivers, is there areas where you need to find balance and just avoid that burnout? And then patients, taking an active role in your own care. Really great. Again, it looks like we have a lot of healthcare providers, and so finding that balance and not only supporting the patient and the caregiver is going to be interesting to hear about for sure. Just a few more housekeeping tips before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, which I see some of you have already discovered, there is a questions bar on your control panel. Feel free to type in any questions you may have throughout the presentation. We are going to wait till the end for Christy to answer all of those, but keep them coming. We want to know what you're interested in learning more about. This not only helps for the end of our presentation Q&A session, but this is also going to help us moving forward in other webinars that we need to present on. So please keep those coming. If you are experiencing trouble, one great thing that you can do is just simply close and reopen the webinar window, and that will usually fix most issues. If you are experiencing any audio troubles, the best solution is normally just to call into the webinar and listen over your phone. On your control panel, there should be an audio tab, and if you select the phone call, there will pop up a number that you can call in order to listen on your phone. Like I said, we have polls, and so throughout the webinar, we are going to engage you, so please interact with those like you have done. Christy has also provided a few helpful handouts. And so again, on your control panel, there is a handout section. These handouts are going to be available to you during this webinar. And so you can view them, you can download them, you can save them and use them as your own resources moving forward. Lastly, this is going to be a recorded webinar. And so if you love this information and would like to use it again, know that it will be archived and you will have access to it using your link that you joined this webinar with. You will also receive a follow-up email afterwards, which will also include the link for you. Just a little bit about Christy Collins. She is a licensed clinical social worker and has been with Texas Oncology for 7 years. She oversees the Texas Oncology Longview support group as well. I actually had the opportunity of meeting Christy in Longview at our Survive and Thrive symposiums. She does an amazing job of not only emphasizing the importance of the caregiver role during a cancer journey, but also empowering patients to take that active role in their own care. Again, I am thrilled to be on this call tonight and to get to hear from Christy. So Christy, feel free to take it away.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. Thank you for that welcome and that opening. I'm excited to do this. I hope everyone can hear me. All right. I am, like Kelly said, I have been with Texas Oncology for a while. I also have a private counseling practice in Longview, and I do end up seeing a lot of caregivers, whether they're cancer caregivers or caregivers for someone else. That's something that I think a lot of people can relate to. So just a couple of things before we get started. I am going to reference, the handouts are wonderful. I'm going to reference the one for the 10 tips for family caregivers throughout the presentation. So I'll kind of go back and forth with that one. The other two you are welcome to look at and kind of use later. The other thing that I need to give a nod to is that some of this presentation actually came from research that the Association for Oncology Social Workers did. So there's some that I actually got several years ago through the AOSW. And some of you guys may be familiar with that organization. It's a great organization to be a part of and do a lot of research and give a lot of support to social workers, specifically in the field of oncology. So I want to give a nod to some of that information. But let's get going. And I don't know why my slide isn't changing. Hang on. There we go. Okay. So I'm really glad that I got a chance to see what the composition of the audience is. It looks like Kelly said, we have a good mix of caregivers, patients, and healthcare providers. But I did see quite a bit about people wanting to know how to support for the healthcare providers wanting to know how to support their patients and their caregivers, and then also for caregivers wanting to prevent burnout, pay attention to that, and learn how to balance. So hopefully that will get addressed. The first poll that I want to ask you guys as we get started is, what do you think constitutes caregiving? So I think Kelly is going to populate that for a second, give you some options to choose from of what sorts of types of things constitute caregiving or being a caregiver. Are we able to get that? Good. So I'm seeing a lot of responses that say emotional support, which is great, and that is very, very true. A lot of what we do as caregivers is just providing the support of being there, talking through things. I'm going to show you this definition, actually, that I found. If I can still have, there we go. So this is a definition that actually, okay, includes all of these types of caregiving. The reason I ask this and put this in here is because sometimes we have to work with caregivers that are not physically in the same location. And so I see some of you guys actually put physical things as well. Caregiving can be a very hands-on task where you are living with someone or living in close proximity to someone and actually doing things for them. But there are people that live further away or are not able to be present or physically present. And so sometimes what we do is we have to kind of make sure that people understand that they can be a caregiver whether they're physically close or not. Sometimes people don't even like using the term caregiver. I'll hear terms like advocate. So that's actually my next question for you, going along with the poll, is who do you think, what do you think constitutes caregivers? Like, is it parents, children, family, friends? So if you guys will respond to that, that'll be the end of the polls for a little while. I see a lot of spouse, which is leads to believe that there probably are several spouses on this call, which is true. Now, I have to say that this data in particular is for caregivers across America, so it's not specific in oncology, but I don't think anyone's surprised to see that children are doing a lot of caregiving when you consider that as your parents age, that's kind of part of the process, is taking care of them. But then, yes, about a fifth, 1 in 5 are spouses. So some of the other things that I think you probably won't be surprised to know is that the majority of caregivers just happen to be female. I saw that there were a lot of men on this call. I have some data here that says 82% are female, about 71% are married. Half of caregivers, or a little over half of caregivers, are new to it, meaning that they haven't been providing care for longer than 6 months. About half of caregivers live with the person that they're caring for, which makes sense when you talk about spouses. But sometimes people will even make the decision to move in with a loved one while they're caring for them. Half of our caregivers are older than 50, and about a third of people reported that caregiving took more than 40 hours a week for them. And when you think about it, what are the things that we do as a caregiver? Well, you can do like the physical things of meal prep and cleaning and transportation and administering medication, but sometimes it's just making a phone call and talking to them. You can see how very, very easily caregiving can kind of take over your world, which is why we're going to talk about burnout a little bit. So one of the things that's important to mention when we talk about being a caregiver is some of the consequences of becoming a caregiver. So we'll kind of start off with some of the more stressful stuff. And I'm sure all of you that are caregivers can agree, healthcare providers, you've maybe seen this, patients, you felt this yourself or seen this in your loved one. It can be very isolating to be a caregiver. It can be very stressful being the person that's having to make the decisions. And sometimes people have reported to me that they feel pressure to be up all the time or be encouraging all the time because they don't want to stress their loved one out. Anger, sadness, And I have to say, when I've given these talks before, it's been in front of a live audience, so it's a little bit different for me to not have the feedback coming back to me or seeing the nods, but I'm going to assume that you all are with me and have seen some of these things yourself. Part of the reason I also talk about this is as healthcare providers, sometimes what we do is we have to normalize these feelings for our caregivers. It's okay that you feel this way. This is normal. A lot of people feel this way. And what I've learned in doing this is that a lot of caregivers have their own health issues that they're wanting to address, their own lives, that they're having to balance with this. However, before we go too far down the road of what's stressful about it, we want to keep in mind that there's a reason that people caregive, right? It's necessary. It's important. We care for our loved ones. We can't live with ourselves to just sort of walk away. We need and want to do this. And what I found is that if you are able to balance this role as caregiver, you do end up with a stronger connection with your loved one. A lot of times you see better communication, and I saw this at the cancer center all the time, clearer priorities. There's nothing like a potentially life-threatening or stressful diagnosis that will make you decide what's important to you. And so you have the potential to really have an increased relationship with your loved one. The other thing that I learned in the research that I did around this is that caregivers and patients feed off of each other, meaning that if the patient's not feeling well, the caregiver is also going to feel not well, which is why the caregiver then feels the burden to want to kind of be happy and positive. And it shows that when the caregiver is actually feeling centered and balanced and positive, then it has the same responses in the patient. Being a caregiver will grow you as a person and increase your joy. So it's a necessary thing. I think that this is going to come as no surprise, but if we look at caregiving as having two major tasks or two things to accomplish, the primary being how to take care of your loved ones. But the secondary, and this is where I'm imagining that you're all nodding and saying, yes, yes, is how to take care of yourself, right? Because you're not going to be able to care well for someone else without also being able to take good care of yourself. I have found that there's about two different ways that people look at caregiving. We call these the models for caregiving, but this is the zero-sum game where you feel like if you're taking care of yourself, then the person you're caring for is suffering, that it has to be one or the other. I'm either all in with caring for someone else and I've got to put myself at the bottom burner, or I care for myself and that's very selfish and that's completely ignoring my loved one. So part of what we have to do is sort of reframe this and realize that that's going to burn you out real quick if you have that belief that it's one or the other. There was actually some research done by a woman named Ahmed a while ago that proposed this idea for the models of caregiving. See if I can get this up. Here we go. That you look at caregiving like a broad-based triangle, where if you have increased the joys and supports in your life, then you're better able to balance the tasks and burdens that come along with caregiving. And I'm sure some of you have seen this to be true. If you're a healthcare provider and you're working with someone who's a caregiver, this is important to assess for them of how are they looking at caregiving? Is I have to be all in for this person and none for myself? Or can you help them see that by taking care of yourself, you're actually better able to handle the pressures that come with caregiving? I don't have a graphic for this, but one of the things that really helped me, one visual that helped me, is thinking about myself having like an energy tank or energy stores. And when I'm really worn out, I'm running on fumes and I don't have a lot to offer people. But if I'm taking care of myself, then you get overflow. You take such good care of yourself that you have overflow, and that is what you serve people out of. And that really made sense to me and kind of helped me get out of this zero-sum game model that I can only give people extras. I have to take care of myself first. So we're gonna break this down in we're gonna spend the rest of the talk looking at, okay, so how do we do this? How do we manage the demands of being a caregiver? And this is where I'm going to reference that 10 tips for family caregivers handout, but I'm also going to give you just a great little acronym. Now, I thought this was pretty good. Hopefully you're all chuckling to yourself or at least smiling. I wish that we had the stress super vac. That would be quite lovely. To just kind of, take care of things. But unfortunately, that's not the way it works. So make this real easy and straightforward. The ABCs of caregiving. So that's what we're going to go through. A stands for awareness, B for balance, and C for connection. So A being for awareness. So probably for those of you that are caregivers, one of the things that you very, very quickly learned is that this is a whole new world and a brave new world. If you look at number 4 on the 10 tips, it says educate yourself about your loved one's condition and how to communicate effectively with doctors. One of the things I heard over and over again when I would speak with cancer caregivers at Texas Oncology was, I feel like I'm a translator. We're both sitting in there listening to the doctor, but my loved one doesn't remember any of it, and I'm sitting there writing it down so that I can make sure we powwow after the fact and we both heard the same thing. A lot of people will, like I said, call themselves translators or, get a new desk calendar, keeping track of all the appointments and what does this word mean? And when a doctor says this, what does that actually mean? And learning about treatments, outcomes. There's a whole new language that you have to learn in this process. So the other thing too is that while you're learning all these new things, you have to take time to address what's actually going on with you and what you're feeling. Like I mentioned before, the tendency to put everything that's going on for you to the side is not going to serve you well. So being able to process not only what's happening, supporting your loved one and talking to them, figuring out what your own emotions are, and recognizing, like I mentioned earlier, that some of those emotions might be negative and you might feel some guilt about that. Well, why am I angry or why am I sad? It's not happening to me. And as healthcare providers, again, I must say that's part of what we normalize for caregivers is it's normal to feel this way because what's really happening is grief. Grief is our response to change. In a very simple way, grief is how we respond to things changing. And so when you have a loved one that gets diagnosed with an illness, even if there is a strong chance of recovery, we're still changing things for the short term. The dynamics in our relationship change, our capabilities change, our how independent we can be changes. And so if you don't take time to actually acknowledge what has been lost, what has changed, what is different, you won't be able to move to the next thing. And actually, that's number 8 on our 10 tips is grieve for your losses and then allow yourself to dream new dreams. You have to acknowledge what's different before you can move forward. And the other thing from the 10 tips I want to mention is when it says number 6, trust your instincts. So in the middle of all this emotional upheaval, it's important to still pay attention to when your body says, I need to rest, I need to talk to someone, I need a break. And we'll go into that more later. But again, awareness is just recognizing all of the things that are different now, that have changed, and the new tasks that are before you. And part of that, again, is recognizing as a caregiver your own emotional responses. I'm really behind on all my living. We can feel so frantic. So the B stands for balance. And I love this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's one of the most beautiful compensations of this life, that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself first. And that goes back to what we were saying about, self-care and being able to take care of yourself. So I'm going to point to number 1 on these tips for caregivers. I say this right off the bat a lot of times, is caregiving is a job. It's a job. You may not get paid, and you may have to do other jobs in addition to caregiving, but caregiving itself is a job. And so taking a break and rewarding yourself is vital. You need it. Nobody works without taking vacation. Nobody works 24/7, and caregiving functions the same way. You're allowed to reward yourself, and you're allowed to take breaks. So we're going to just talk a minute about self-care and self-care strategies. Hopefully, none of this is a surprise to you, and I'm assuming that you also have things that you would like to add to this list. So this is by no means comprehensive, but there's some of the things that we know are good ways to take little breaks and take care of yourself. So sleeping, eating, exercising, important. Paying attention to your own emotions, making sure you spend time with friends, crying. And in my private counseling practice, one of the things I hear a lot is crying is a sign of weakness. And I always just cringe a little bit and say, no, crying is good. Crying is so important. Sometimes it's your body's way of responding to stress, and it's okay. Now, you may decide that you want to cry in controlled environments, not in front of people, and that's okay, but don't shut it out completely, because it's important. Along with laughing. I don't know if anyone's tried gratitude lists. I know that a lot of times my go-to for stress is humor, and I think people can use humor well. In a minute, we're going to talk about the term medicalizing your home. And one of the things that happens as a caregiver is sometimes you're required to give a shot, change a peg tube, do things that maybe aren't so glamorous. You may have special beds or special equipment in your home. And so one of the ways that you can address that is through humor. If that's something that you and your partner are comfortable with, it can break the ice. Doing things for fun. I like under psychological the say no, that having boundaries and being able to say no so that you can say yes to something else. Very important. And if you are also working in a paid job, take your vacations, use those things. Nobody gets a ribbon for working the most, right? As much as we would like that, we need those rests. And number 10 on the 10 tips for family caregivers says, stand up for your rights as a caregiver and a citizen. You also have rights in this process, and they need to be addressed. Now, I will say, and let me say this, if we're still on the 10 tips for caregivers, I put number 7. I didn't know where else to put number 7. I thought this was a really good thing, but it doesn't really fit with the emotional context of the rest of the talk. But it says caregivers often do a lot of lifting, pushing, and pulling, so be good to your back. I feel like that's always a very good rule of thumb, to be nice to your back and don't strain your body. So as you're contemplating balance as a caregiver, and again, as healthcare providers, and even as patients, these are the things that you are helping your families figure out. How do we keep some level of stability? How do we kind of adjust to what our new normal is? You have to figure out if income is going to be affected because of a loved one not being able to work. That has to be addressed. What are your resources? And then, like I mentioned, the medicalization of your home, being aware that that's going to happen and how you want to address that to make some of that more bearable. I'm going to talk just a minute about burnout. I know there were some questions here about burnout. Caregiving in and of itself is stressful, and it's going to be stressful. You've got these emotional things, these physical things, these fears and worries. So some of what's listed on this screen is going to happen. It becomes a problem if it's happening all the time. And that's really the difference here. Of course, you're going to feel like you're on an emotional roller coaster. Of course, you're going to be tired. Of course, you're going to forget things. But if it's happening more often than not, that's a warning sign. If your own immune system is responding in negative ways, where you're sick all the time, that's actually a sign of burnout. Snapping at people, it's going to happen, but is it happening every day? More often than not. And then, have you stopped doing things that you enjoy? So if you were someone that liked to volunteer, if you were someone that always had coffee or lunch with friends once a month and you've stopped doing that, that's a warning sign. The other thing is not having any other caregiving options. I know that several of our caregivers are in situations where they feel like there are no other resources, but nothing will burn you out more if you don't at least have some sort of backup plan, plan B. I call it pinch hitters. But if you are always the one that is taking care, is getting the phone call, is doing the things, that's going to burn you out more quickly. So if you're able to, and again, whether it's other family members, friends, even the doctor's office, if there's a social worker or someone who handles assistance that you can speak to about, how do I get other resources so that I'm not on call 24/7? Tagging along with burnout, and I need to put the disclaimer on here that discussing depression, this is in no means a substitute for speaking with your doctor and getting professional care. If this is something that is a serious concern for you, you need to talk to your doctor. You need to set up support with a counselor in some way. Number 2 on the 10 tips for family caregivers is watch out for signs of depression and don't delay in getting professional help when you need it. I can't say that I'm surprised to see that 1 in 5 caregivers suffer from depression. Again, I'm imagining that you guys are nodding or with me here and can see this as happening as healthcare providers or as patients, that you've seen this in your loved ones. One of the ways to know or to understand that depression is serious is this idea that you're not going to snap out of it. Like, if you feel the same way day after day, that's a problem. Depression is not something that you just wake up, get over, and move through. It's going to take a while. The other thing is, if you catch yourself socially isolating, big red flag. Big red flag. If you're not talking to others and if you find your only interaction is with the patient you're caring for, that is not good. The other thing too is when you feel like your to-do list is just so large, being able to break things into smaller tasks. So if you tell yourself, I'm going to get all the dishes done today or vacuum all the floors, that's not as helpful as saying, I'm going to do one load or one room. That's one of those things that you have to grieve when you have a change like this, is you may not be capable of doing all the things you previously could do. That's part of caregiving, but that's also another sign of something more serious. If you find that you've had a change in eating patterns, sleeping patterns, you're socially isolating, you can't seem to find anything positive to focus on, please, please, please get professional help. And I will say that the other 2 handouts that you have, there's a little burnout quiz, and then there's a checklist for how to get some other resources. if you are concerned that burnout or depression is an issue for you. And I wish I could say this goes without saying, but this is one of the things that I found is an issue with some caregivers is letting other people help, right? Some people say, well, it's my responsibility. I have to, I should. That goes back to balance. You've got to be nice to yourself, take care of yourself. Other people want the opportunity to help you and bless you, and it is the best thing you can do for yourself to allow them to do that. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over this because, once again, this is not a substitute for psychotherapy and speaking with a healthcare professional. But when you are feeling incredibly overwhelmed, what have I reiterated over and over again? Increase your social support. Talk to more people. Task-focused behaviors, what this means is that instead of focusing on, I need to make someone feel better, it's, I need to just unload the dishwasher. So focus on things that are pretty easy to check off your list, that are small, and that are easily accomplished. Now, emotional distancing, this isn't to say that you should numb yourself and cut yourself off from your loved one. This is about being able to sort of distract yourself when you have to go in and do something that is, will be emotional and difficult. If you're able to kind of distract yourself from that and then give yourself the opportunity to cry, fall apart, whatever it is you need to do outside of the tasks that need to happen. Cognitive self-talk is just a fancy way of saying how we talk to ourselves. If you're telling yourself, I'm supposed to be Superwoman, I'm supposed to be Superman, I'm supposed to get everything done, gosh, I can't believe I didn't do that today. That's negative self-talk, and it's going to lead to more burnout and more feelings of depression. So learning how to change those messages and the way you talk to yourself, again, talking to a healthcare professional is the way to work through some of this. Altruism is giving back, volunteering, finding a way to kind of get outside of your daily routine. And then I will say, and I do a lot of this in my practice, there are so many resources for mindfulness, relaxation, yoga, deep breathing, things in ways to address your own overwhelmed response. All of these things should be a part of working with a healthcare professional or a counselor. These are things that they're going to talk to you about to address. So that is the direction you should be headed if you are feeling overwhelmed or burnt out. So we need, yes, I almost forgot. This is how I wish it would be. I'm imagining you're all having a good chuckle now, but I wish Prozac Mist was a thing. I could use that in my own life for sure. But since it's not, right, let's move on to the C, which is for connection. And I think that this is probably kind of the key point that I want to make. If you remember back on my earlier slides about deepening your connection with your loved one, it is one of the joyous things that can happen from caregiving is really seeing another person again and really finding out what matters in your relationships. So I'm going to be looking at number 5, number 3, and number 9 on the tips for family caregivers. I love number 5. It says there's a difference between caring and doing. And I find that to be kind of a gut check for myself of like, am I just busy like doing things because they make me feel better? Or am I really checking in with what my loved one is asking for, what they really want? It is hard for patients to lose some of their independence, to lose some of their functioning. And those of you that are listening as patients, I'm sure you can relate to this, that the change is just as hard for you as it is for the caregiver. Being able to tune in and make adjustments for when somebody wants to do something that you may not agree with, but it's what your loved one wants. And so you can be caring for them without necessarily doing things for them. Number 3 is when people offer to help, accept the offer and suggest specific things they can do. So there's actually some websites I've given you here where you can look. They make these little tear-off sheets that just has like things like mow my lawn, wash my car, pick up deodorant at the store, grind my coffee beans. I mean, whatever it is, things that you don't think of, take my annual donation down to the church or whatever it is. Because for those of you that are caregivers, you probably know if you don't give people specific things to do, you're going to get a lot of casseroles. People tend to help by providing food, which is helpful. But for those of you that have done this before, you can end up with a freezer full and still be stressed about who's going to take the car in to have the brakes checked, So it's very, very helpful to just come up with specific things that you can go to. If you already have them written up ahead of time, then you don't have to think about it when people say, let me know what I can do, right? It's always we feel awkward talking to people who we know are hurting. And so we kind of just say, let me know what I can do, and put the burden back on the caregiver to provide that. If you've got a list, you can just say, actually, I need deodorant. Please go pick that up for me, So don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to take those offers of help and give them specific things. Number 9 is to seek support from other caregivers. So again, one of the themes I've talked about is don't isolate yourself. So find other caregivers that you can talk to, and keep in mind that this really isn't a one-man or one-woman show. That this is something that both you and the patient are experiencing at the same time. Because again, part of the way to fuel connection is to recognize that, to see yourselves when you're going to your separate corners and your own, emotional stressors, and being able to talk about what's stressful for the patient as well as what's stressful for the caregiver, and try to figure it out together. What makes caregivers effective? I want you guys to note on here that nowhere on here does it say being physically strong, or making sure that they do, like, prepare all the meals or drive the car or attend all the appointments, right? Effective caregivers, these are all intangible character qualities. Your ability to be present with someone in the midst of deep pain, your ability to take perspective of others, which is empathy, like understanding someone else's perspective, but also being very kind and generous towards yourself, and recognize that what you're doing as a caregiver is hard. Having respect for yourself and others, being authentic, being flexible. Mutual participation is basically what I said on the other slide of, it's not just you. You're not a one-person show. So the qualities that make someone effective are, like I said, they're these intangible things that may be difficult, but are also simple in a way, right? They're not very task-oriented. It's a little bit about how you choose to live your life and take care of yourself. So what's not going to work? Trying to do everything, as I've mentioned several times. Sticking your head in the sand and pretending that everything's fine and everything's going to stay the same. Because again, that doesn't allow you to grieve. That doesn't allow you to grieve the things that have changed. You can't move forward when you stop and say, I'm sticking my head in the sand. Distancing, which again is not the same as like protective emotional distancing when you need to. This is just numbing and staying away. And I don't know how many of you on this call have done this or have experienced this through others. Sometimes you find that your friends and family sort of disappear when there's a catastrophic diagnosis. And I don't know that people do it intentionally. I think that people feel helpless. And in the practice of feeling helpless, they sort of withdraw. And so that's why I talk so much about connection, because you have to kind of actively fight that, to not pull away, to say, maybe I'll just be here for a while, or, give me a specific task. I want to be present. What else doesn't work? Not allowing yourself time to process your own stuff. And I've said a different variation of this before, but it's important. Your partner, your loved one, whether it's a parent, a child, a spouse, whoever you're caring for, they're just as worried about you as you are about them. And so when you cut yourself off and don't share those things, you're driving disconnection. Again, being able to increase your supports outside of just who you're caring for, but also making sure that you are being very real and checked in with your loved one is what is the most effective. Your need to have a conversation about our problems is interfering with my need to pretend they don't exist. And if I had a nickel every time I felt this way or saw people this way, right? Discomfort and pain is hard. Change is hard. And one of the things, again, that drives connection is being able to lean into some of those things and not be afraid of it. Doing what you need to do to take care of yourself and work through it so that you can get to the other side. We know that our loved ones need us, and we know that we can't do it alone. And so if you are able to harness your ability to have awareness, to have balance in caregiving for yourself, that's going to bring you to a closer connection with your partner, and you're going to get to the other side with this. You're going to get through this. You're going to create this new normal, and find your way on the other side with hopefully a deeper and richer connection with your loved one. So that's actually what I have for the presentation today. I appreciate you guys hanging with me and taking the time out of your schedule to read and listen. And I think I'm going to try to address some questions at this point. Kelly, to compile some questions and maybe combine, or how should we handle that?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been just taking notes as questions have come in, so I can just kind of throw the questions out there and then let you respond if you want to do it that way.
Absolutely. That'll work.
Awesome. So one scenario that has come up is when your loved one is just having a hard time accepting their prognosis. And so how, as caregivers, can we come in and help them come to terms with their diagnosis?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I do hear that a lot, right? Because one of the things that can happen is you are kind of developing on different paths, right? Like, I'm the realist, and this is the person that's still in denial. The grieving process hits everyone differently. So on the one hand, you're not going to be able to force or change someone's perspective with where they are. But I can also tell you that by trying to get them to a certain place, you may drive them away. So, if someone is in denial about where they are, one of the best things you can do is, again, make sure that you've got an outlet for your stressors and frustrations. But also not letting that frustration with your loved one keep you from communicating with them, right? Which is why, like, having other people to talk to is helpful, because talking to someone who's just not there yet and is just not ready is so difficult. But what I can tell you again is you're not going to force it out of them. You just have to take a gentler tack of, like, okay, you're not there yet. But this is where I am, and I need help solving this problem. So, making sure you're either talking to others and still communicating with your loved one by letting them kind of grieve in their own way.
Absolutely. Whenever you were discussing burnout and just ways that caregivers can just kind of help themselves through that, you mentioned that there are normally resources that social workers give out. Are there any that specifically stand out to you that you enjoy recommending to others that you think are very helpful?
For addressing burnout specifically?
Just like additional support options that caregivers could get. You just said there was resources that a lot of social workers give out. And so I guess, are there just any support groups or anything that you really like that you would recommend?
Well, yes, and I would say that probably a lot of that is going to be locally based. That's why I said that, was depending on where your loved one is getting treatment,
Mm-hmm.
talking to them about what they know is in their specific community. There are the large organization like Cancer Care does a lot of good stuff. Let me think. There's, you know what I can do is, as I kind of like ponder this, I can put some of that together and send it to you to distribute, because I'm kind of blanking on the spot right now. I'm a big fan too of like maybe harnessing online resources as well. I found
Mm-hmm.
where I'm located, I'm in East Texas, and so it's not a large urban area. And so while there may not be something specific here, a lot of times you can find things through social media or online of people who share similar diagnoses or similar concerns.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things we got here was, well, can I talk to someone just about lung or just about colon or just about, um, those things? And we just don't have the luxury in East Texas of having all those different breakouts, but you can find it online. So let me do that. Let me think some more on this and get that sent out. But really, when I made that comment, it was about just your local center having maybe local resources.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then just one more question. There were some comments that came in that basically they were assumed that they were feeling depressed when it was actually grieving or preparing to grieve
Yes.
the loss that they were going to have to deal with if a
Yes.
loved one did pass. And so I guess, what are just some encouragements or some tips you can give for accepting that grieving, but also making sure and checking ourselves that we are not slipping into that depression?
Well, so that's another really, really good question. One of the best ways that I visualize grief is like imagining being in the middle of an ocean. And so in the middle of an ocean, your emotional peaks are very high and very low, and it can feel very tumultuous. But as time goes on, it's just like being in an ocean. The intensity level does reduce little by little over time. I'll tell people, even who are a couple of years out, you can be sitting on the shore minding your own business, and sometimes out of nowhere, you'll get something kind of powerful knock you over a little bit. So, grieving kind of has that wave feeling to it. It's like what I said before, that if you feel like it is pervasive and constant, that is something that needs to get checked out. And if you're socially isolating, grieving is going to be painful regardless, but you can grieve in a social context. You can grieve in communication with others. Depression, unfortunately, is very, very isolating. It is, and it's funny that I say it this way, but it is a self-involved disease, in that you really lose your capability to see others because things get so dark in front of you that you're not able to track what's going on with other people. And so that's really the biggest difference, in that, if you're socially isolating and if you feel like it is constant, that's when you need to get more assistance.
Very good. Well, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time, so we're going to wrap up this Q&A session. If you have a question that you were unable to ask tonight, feel free to email, and we can connect you with Christy as well for those answers, or with others who could have those answers. I do want to introduce the executive director of our foundation, Natalie O'Rourke, and she's just going to wrap us up tonight. Christy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is Natalie O'Rourke. I want to, Christy, thank you so much for the information you shared tonight. You give so many great resources and such great information information in a digestible way. And once again, you knocked it out of the park, so thank you. And I am especially thankful for all of those who joined the webinar tonight and for the great questions and dialogue. So as we bring this webinar to a close, I want to remind you that we need to hear from you. We are building our survivorship programming with your feedback. So this webinar can only be enhanced with the surveys that will pop up on your screen as we close out this webinar. So please just take a moment to provide us with any feedback that you have on today's presentation, as well as any topics that you would like to see covered at future webinars. I want to also remind you that the foundation, of course, with part of our mission being focusing on survivorship, we do have survivorship webinars each month. So these Survive and Thrive webinars are each month with a different topic. So follow us on Facebook, go to our website, find that information. But additionally, we have a Survive and Thrive symposium that we host, and we take it around the state. So in the fall, you've got 3 coming up. You've got Beaumont, you've got Dallas, and you've got Houston. So if you're in any of those markets, be on the lookout for that information. So thank you all for a wonderful evening. Again, Christy, thank you. Kelly did a great job organizing, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the week.